He received his early OSS training at the British-run school at Oshawa, Canada, the same school where Ian Fleming, the creator of James Bond, was trained. White referred to the school in his diaries as the Oshawa School of Mayhem and Murder. Mike Burke, former OSS colleague of White's and now president of Madison Square Garden Center.
Very compelling fellow, mysterious fellow, almost mystical fellow. He was fascinating because you knew something about him, but not enough about him to really get a fix on him. He also knew a great deal about the swifter elements of society, the gamier side of life. And he was very impressive in his technical knowledge of the underworld, so to speak.
He said, one of our men gets beat up. He says, you have to act real fast and teach these guys a lesson.
Charles Siragusa, a former narcotics officer and friend of White's.
He'll come around, he says, and break your kneecaps. And with that, one guy laughed, and George would always have little Billy with him. And this one guy sort of snickered. George Wright turned around and whapped him across the neck with it. Then he picked up a pool stick and started beating everybody up.
He made his point.
And he made his point.
George White was not a man of understatement or subtleties. His boss at OSS, Stanley Lovell, referred to him as deadly and dedicated. In this note from White's diaries, it says, call Lovell regarding TD. TD was a rather transparent cover for Truth Drug. George White worked with the Truth Drug Committee here at St. Elizabeth's Hospital in the nation's capital. They experimented with mescaline, scopolamine, and marijuana on unwitting victims. The committee soon learned there was no easy panacea, no truth drug at this stage. But White and later colleagues would not stop trying. The goal remained the same. As this 1952 CIA memo says, the aim is controlling an individual to the point where he will do our bidding against his will, and even against such fundamental laws of nature as self-preservation. But it was a discovery here in Basel, Switzerland, at Sandoz Laboratories by Dr. Albert Hoffman, that led the intelligence agencies of America to believe that they had found the panacea. The discovery was lysergic acid diethylamide, LSD. The film that you see is considered by many experts to be the closest illustration of the effects of a hallucinogenic.
It was one of the first times that anybody had run into a powerful drug that was different than anything else that they knew anything about.
John Gittinger, recently retired chief psychologist for the CIA. This is the first time Gittinger has been interviewed publicly.
We could disable a whole city by putting a very small amount in a water supply. After all of these years of us, those of us who involved in looking for this secret drug, this was the only thing that began to look for the first time like it might be something like that.
The CIA's interest in LSD was intense. The worry was that the Russians would get hold of it. Were the Soviets into LSD?
I'm going to have to say I'm sure they were, but if you ask me to prove it, I've never seen any direct proof of it.
But at one point, intelligence information received from Switzerland said that Sandoz Laboratories was about to put 100 million doses of LSD on the open market. And it caused enough concern within the agency that the United States was prepared to buy the entire supply. However, a slight mistake had been made. The mistake is made public for the first time.
I just found out on a new CIA document that there were no such large quantities of LSD on the market.
Joan Marks has filed numerous Freedom of Information suits against the CIA and has unearthed much new material. He is the author.
How was that? Okay, so we're getting better. I'm gonna have to work on my intro. These are live intros. I'm trying to do like VJ DJ remixing because nobody does that for their intro except for like 6 people that make music all the time. And I should set up some music equipment and just do that. Anyway, how are you, everybody? Welcome to Day 2 Andreas Exertus' live chat and stream where I'm going to tell you some stuff about Egypt, but the other day someone said, I think Illuminati was, I love Illuminati. He's on here all the time, and he's a great person. He was talking about Mormons. Well, he was talking about America and Egypt in America. And there's a lot of videos that are talking about Egypt being in America. Now, this is not what I believe, but it's very close. This is so close to what I believe. I'm going to talk about it, and I would never just ignore a theory. And if I don't know enough about it, you guys can come in and tell me more. If you guys think that there's something I'm missing about, Egypt is really just one place and every other place just doesn't matter, then I'm like explain to me and maybe I'll get it. But from my understanding, the Mormons would have said that if they could, and instead have said there are a bunch of people there that have come. For instance, the Lehites who come to the land, and the Jaredites. Now there's the Molochites, the Jaredites, the Lehites, and the Lamanites, etc. But they're not all at the same time. Lamanites and Nephites come at the same time because they're coming with Lehi, who's the father, right? And the father is the family member of Joseph. So it gets back into the Egyptian thing of the Joseph Technicolor Dreamcoat. His family become very powerful. The Messenian and the Alphenian, I think it's called, right? Is that right? The different groups of priests that are descended from Joseph have two different tribes, technically, according to the royal houses of the Semitic tribes, the Israelite tribes. But they're the house of Joseph, according to Joseph Smith. So Joseph, he's got some interesting things to say. We're going to look into that. But let me look at a couple other things first. Let me pull up my... I have some things I wanted to show you guys. Let me see here. First thing... Oh, yeah, well, of course... Let me make sure this works. Boom. You guys know that this is still on sale. Get yourself the California Beach Dreamer t-shirt, or you can get a v-neck or a sweatshirt or something like that. This is one of my favorite shirts. You can also get a tote bag. I love it as a tote bag. I think the tote bag is like one of my favorite things. So enjoy that. Anyway, you guys heard me talk about Moses yesterday. Some Osarsif stuff. Let me pull up something kind of interesting. So this is the book of Lehi, but don't get it confused with the militant group of Israel, the fighters for freedom of Israel, Lehi, known as the Stern Gang, which was a paramilitary Zionist and terrorist organization founded by Avraham Yair Stern in Mandatory Palestine. Its avowed aim was to evict the British authorities from Palestine by use of violence, allowing the unrestricted immigration of Jews and the formation of a Jewish state, a new totalitarian Hebrew Republic, quote unquote. It was initially called the National Military Organization in Israel. Upon being founded in 1940 of August, was renamed Lehi 1 month later, which is an acronym for their cause. I was wondering if I could find any connections to Joseph's tribe. Have yet to do it, but I'm sure someone who could talk to me and could explain to me this and maybe make more sense of the matter. Bats my eyes. Lehi initially sought an alliance with fascist Italy and Nazi Germany, offering to fight alongside them against the British in return for the transfer of all Jews from Nazi-occupied Europe into Palestine, believing that Nazi Germany was the lesser enemy of the Jews than Great Britain. Lehi twice attempted to form an alliance with the Nazis. During the World War II, he declared that it would be established a Jewish state upon a nationalist and totalitarian principle. After Stern's death in 1942, a new leadership of Lehi began to move it toward support for Joseph Stalin of the Soviet Union. In 1944, Lehi officially declared its support for National Bolshevism. It said that its National Bolshevism involved an amalgamation of left-wing and right-wing political elements. Stern and Lehi incorporated elements of both the left and the right. However, this change was unpopular, and Lehi began to lose support as a result. So you can see right there an interesting correlation between Germany and the Lehi movement in the war in 1930s to 40s. I mean, 1940 is pretty late on to be making alliances with Germany if you're Israeli, I would think. But maybe, there's something more to the story that we haven't been told. So Lehi was created goals and methods to bring together all those interested in liberation to appear before the world as the only active Jewish military organization to take over Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, by armed forces, and to use this cool symbol, which everybody... I mean, wait, am I doing this right? Hold on. Yeah, it's hard to do, Like, God, to do this right takes, like, some Jesusian effort, and so this became a symbol of Zionist fascism. I like that in a weird way. I think it's important for there to be groups of nationalists that are trying to protect their interests. Of course, the irony being there's a certain amount of death involved in protection. But hey, you know what? I think that's as much as we should say. So let's also check out what I meant when I said Lehi originally. No, let's not. Let's wait. There's something I wanted to read you last time. I forgot to read you. Boom. Okay. The real Ark of the Covenant may have... This is from Haaretz. I don't know if you guys know what Haaretz is, but it's Haaretz, I mean, it's... yeah. Haaretz is kind of popular in Israel. So, the Holy Ark of the Covenant was likely kept in Jerusalem for much less time than the Bible tells us, and it may have contained something other than the Ten Commandments. Dun, dun, dun. Everyone knows the story from Indiana Jones, right? Indiana Jones has got this box that burns holes in the CIA or OSS's, lockers, and in the Germans' submarine and in boat. It's all dangerous all the time. So something about that, and I kind of need to rewatch it to remember where they go in that movie, because you can imagine Istanbul, Egypt. There's some places it could be besides Palestine that it's been moved to. I mean, the thought of it being in Turkey, brought to Turkey from Palestine, actually makes a certain amount of sense following the story that we'll soon find out from the Mormons about this. And by the way, so if Egypt is not Utah, that doesn't mean that Eden is not Missouri. And I know that seems... Arguably, Eden being Missouri is weirder and crazier, and I'm going to prove that anyway. So I feel like we're not really stepping away from the importance of the Americas in the narrative, all right? And again, it's the Bible, it's the Book of Mormon, it's the Quran, it's the Torah. These are, some people will look at them as comic books. So remember, when we're using this, we're going to try to focus on as much of the scientific data as possible, even if it's probably lies, right? Because there's scientific data which are lies, and then there is religion which is con artistry. I mean, not all of it, but there are, examples. You can think of, on anyone who doesn't believe in something tends to think the other religion's con artistry. So we're going to have to look at all of the different aspects together to try to figure out what the lie is about, just like news and history. Okay, so let me jump back. Ark of the Covenant, you could support this annual subscription. Ariel David says, the last time the Ark of the Covenant was supposedly seen was in Jerusalem some 2,600 years ago. Archaeologists reveal secrets of Roman prison that held both Christian saints and Jewish rebels. This is other articles, but keep it in your mind. 9,500-year-old plastered skull were the vast Middle East ancestor cult. I'm going to have to look at that for later. Second monumental ark of Titus, celebrating victory over Jews found in Rome. How Arabs made Israel's desert bloom more than 1,500 years ago. Well, that's important too. We can look at that because this idea of feedback loops and change in nature. I know this is not the article that I was planning on reading, so I'm just going to browse it for my own selfish interest. But you guys know that paradiser, it means emperor, as well as gardener in Persian. So when you talk about this idea of gardening, to turn the desert into garden, and we can look at examples of where things were turned to desert on purpose because there were floods and people were trying to dry out zones, and there are ways actually of collecting water into aqueducts. Some of these underground aqueducts were essential because water would otherwise evaporate. So underground aqueducts with grounds to filter the water, physically designed. That's going to come up in this story. Okay, and plastered skulls. Well, I think we all know what happened with death masks and plastered skulls, and people worshiping death and consuming the dead. In fact, I forget if we did a thing on the Egyptians who, Ewing and I talked about the Egyptians and the idea that some of the mummy cults were a later cult, not in the origins of cult, but I believe there were mummification rituals because I've seen mummification in Songhai, and so I believe that the Songhai Empire, using mummification rituals, outdates Christianity in the region. You can see that 1493 is the beginning. Do I have that book? Yeah, I don't have it nearby, do I? You know what? Take 10 seconds and just think about your life. The Holy Roman Empire was neither holy nor Roman nor an empire. Discuss amongst yourselves. Bum, bum, bum. Where's my book? Cool, guys. I just got a new book, so I have to show it to you. I know. You're like, really? That's like dead air. Imagine someone doing that on CNN. Okay, so let's see here. Some 500 years ago, the Askaya Muhammad founded the Songhai dynasty of the Askayas, which flourished for more than a century in Sahelian West Africa. The Askaya Muhammad administered his kingdom from Gao, Mali, although through most of his loyal followers, they were located in Timbuktu in Mali. The Timbuktu-based scribe Al-Hajj Mahmud Khati was a close friend of Askaya Muhammad, who accompanied the famous Songhai leader during his pilgrimage to Mecca. The Tariq al-Fatash is an eyewitness account of the rise and fall of the Songhai Empire, told from Khati's perspective as a key participant in most of the important events from the era of the Askayas. Why Timbuktu's chronicles go from 1493 to 1599. There's a translation of Octave Haudis and Maurice Delfo's rendition of the Tariq al-Fatash. So, basically, this is a book you guys are going to want to get your hands on. It's not that expensive. Somebody made a comic book about it. I'm going to get that too because it's legit. But if we're going to start studying the importance of Moorish culture, because Moors are going to come up more and more in the history, more and more Moors everywhere you go. Okay, so let's get back to this for a second. Now, archaeologists are exploring the ancient town of Kiriath Jearim, where the Bible says the ark was kept for more than 20 years before being taken to Jerusalem. Even if the excavators don't expect to find the Ark of the Covenant itself, I'm doing this right? Okay. The Ark of the Covenant itself, they've made discoveries that shed new light on the history of the ancient Israelites and the birth of Judaism itself. Their finds also support theories that King David may not have been the one who moved the ark to Jerusalem. And I'm not going to really get into King David today because it's just further along in this this story. If we can't call it history, we'll call it this story. But according to the biblical tale, after the people of Israel bore the ark of the covenant through the desert and following Joshua's conquest of Canaan, it was kept in the tabernacle at Shiloh and was then lost in a terrible battle to the Philistines. But God punished the Philistines with sickness and other plagues, and they wisely returned their booty to the Israelites. Well, good for you. When they settled the ark, who then settled the ark at Kiriath Jearim for 20 more years. Then the story goes that King David took to Jerusalem to be housed, first in a tent and later in King Solomon's temple. So looking at this picture, you can see Israel Finkelstein, second from the left, inspecting remains of a massive retainment wall, a moor, that supported a temple at Jearim. So from that point on, until Jerusalem's destruction by the Babylonians, the ark strangely disappeared from the biblical narrative. Nowhere does it figure in the exploits of the kings of Judah or of Israel. Pointed out by Thomas Romer, a world-renowned expert in Hebrew Bible and professor at the Collège de France and the University of Lausanne. Supernatural powers that hasn't stopped scholars and archaeologists from seeking out any clue about its history. Maybe the ark's enduring mystique lies in the fact that, according to the Bible, it contained the original stone tablets of the Ten Commandments, and it had godly powers, which could rally the Israelite armies in battle or strike dead anyone who dared touch it or look inside it. When they return daily to the base camp, and archaeologists digging at Kiriath Jearim divide their finds into various baskets with labels like glass, animal bones, or small finds, just one basket remains inevitably empty, the one jokingly labeled the ark. No one expects to find any trace of the elusive ark in the ruins of this ancient Israelite settlement. I'm not interested in the historicity of the ark narrative. I want to know what's behind it, what it tells us about the history of Judah and Israel, of the cult of the God of Israel, and the Temple of Jerusalem, says archaeologist Israel Finkelstein of Tel Aviv University, who has conducted digs at 2 locations said to have housed the ark, at Shiloh, north of Jerusalem, back in the 1980s, and this month at Kiryat Jearim in a joint project with the Collège de France. Not King David, after all. Many biblical scholars think the story of the ark was a separate text that the so-called ark narrative dating from around the 8th century BC, which was later incorporated into the biblical text in the book of Samuel, perhaps just before the exile to Babylon. So the story in 2 Samuel chapter 6 about how David brought the ark to Jerusalem is actually a later tradition that was tacked on to the original ark narrative, which initially ended with its arrival in Kiryat Jearim, rumor suspects. It has long been forgotten who wrote the Bible. Different parts were clearly written in different times by different people over hundreds and hundreds of years, but the Davidic or Solomonic texts are not believed to have originated in their own time, only centuries later. Also, while there is still debate over the historicity of figures like David and Solomon, most scholars agree that there is little archaeological evidence for the large united Israelite kingdom in the 10th century described in the Bible. The biblical texts that recount the glorious empire and Solomon's building of the temple seem to originate from the late 7th century BC. In that time of King Josiah, around 3 centuries after the supposed Davidic era, Romer says, Hosea, go ahead and tell me. Someone told me that I was supposed to say Josephus instead of Josephus, and I will continue to say Josephus to make you happy, with a little bit of extra there, emphasis. It is possible the ark stayed much longer at. Oh wait, did I miss something? Josiah was the Judean king known for expanding the borders of Judah and centralizing the worship of Yahweh at the temple in Jerusalem while stamping out all the other cults. It is possible that the ark stayed much longer at Kiryat Jearim, and it was only Josiah who brought it to Jerusalem when he wanted to centralize all cultic political activity there. And his scribes justified it by writing the story about David taking the ark. Romer postulates, this might explain why there are no more stories about it, since after Josiah's reign, Judah would have survived less than 3 decades before falling to the Babylonians. The Bible itself, in what may be an editorial slip-up, appears to confirm Josiah's role in bringing the ark to Jerusalem. It is he, not David, who tells the Levites in Chronicles 2, chapter 35:3, to verse 3, to put the holy ark in the house that Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel, built. You need not carry it on your shoulders. So Josiah, stealing the Ark of the Covenant. Stealing at least some of the stuff in the Ark of the Covenant. Am I right, fam? So, 9-foot thick wall. There is also extra biblical evidence for the Josiah theory coming from the dig at Kiryat Jearim, which is an artificial hill created by stratified remains of human habitation. Dang. So like a death hill. Located just 12 kilometers west of Jerusalem. This is the first time that the Bible sites have been investigated. This biblical site has been investigated in depth. The remains uncovered there range from early Bronze Age to the Byzantine period. The main discovery of this season so far has been the massive retaining wall, 3 meters thick. A 9-foot thick wall. It's still standing 2 meters tall, which, judging from the pottery shards that surround it, dates from the 8th or 7th century BC. This wall supported an artificially flattened terrace at the top of the mound and was common for settlements across the Levant. The terrace could have housed a temple. Finkelstein told Haaretz during a tour of the site last week. This site might have been one of the most important cultic centers of the country, says Christophe Nicole, an archaeologist from Collège de France, who jointly directs the Shmunis family excavation at Kiryat Jearim with Finkelstein and Romer. This reinforces the idea that there was a temple here in the 8th or 7th century BC, perhaps in competition with the Temple of Jerusalem, Finkelstein says. Such competition, at least initially, would have had a stronger national character, although the Judahite capital of Jerusalem was just a few kilometers away. Kiriath Jearim was a Benjamite town according to the Bible, so in certain periods, Kiriath Jearim could have been a border settlement belonging to the northern kingdom of Israel, which encompassed all the tribes of Israel except Judah. The kingdom of Israel also dwarfed Judah in size and power, and was often at loggerheads with its southern neighbor until it was destroyed by the Assyrians in the late 8th century. Only then, mainly during Josiah's time, was Judah able to expand into Benjamin and other areas, which is also why Judah and Benjamin were the only Israelite tribes that were not lost in the Assyrian conquest. Okay, so Judah and Benjamin were the only Israelite tribes that were not lost in the Assyrian conquest. Just want to make sure you guys get that part, because it's going to come in real handy with making you think that some of the stuff that Joseph Smith said wasn't completely balderdash, I think is the word. Okay, so in other words, the archaeological evidence showing strong cultic activity at Kiriath Jearim in the 8th and 7th centuries, well after King David was supposed to have carried off the ark. Okay, so we're dealing with this 10 generation thing being kind of a pseudonym or pseudochronology. But before King Joseph brought the area under Jerusalem's control, there are hints of rivalry between Judah and Israel in the fact that the book of Josiah repeatedly mentions the Kiriath Jearim, which means town of forests in Hebrew, which was also known as Kiriath Baal or Bala, linking the worship of Canaanite god Baal, something akin to the anathema for the biblical scribes of Josiah's time. The dual name is also mentioned in 1 Chronicles 13, verse 6. David and all Israel went to Bala of Judah, Kiriath Jearim, to bring up from there the ark of the God, the Lord. If these theories are correct, it would mean that the Ark of the Covenant, one of the symbols most associated with Judaism, was in fact housed in Jerusalem only in the final decades before Babylonian invasion. For most of its life, it would have been in Kiriath Jearim, in its previous home, Shiloh, today in the West Bank. And this is interesting when you look at Mormons and the tribe of Judah, because let me see if I can just pull that up. No, this is not right. Tribe of Judah, though. No. Tribe of Judah. Anybody? Well, okay, I'll have to look for it later. That's embarrassing. There is a thing, though, that in the end of days, the tribe of Melchizedek and the tribe of Aaron and the tribe of Judah become very important in the end of days. So, let's look really quickly at which button is this, right? This one. So you can see here, Jacob's sons leading to Jesus along this line. Judah is what is the leader leading to King David. So, and then to Jesus. So this is an important thing if you follow Jacob to Leah to Judah. Important thing's kind of it's a subjective term, I hope, because it's not that important unless you're subjectively obsessed with finding out the lineage. And in this period, so much of what these stories is about is, does this person have the right blood to do this? Is he blood related to this person? And that tends to be the thing. They're like, well, if he's his son, he has the energy or spirit to take over and rule his kingdom, which is not the way people feel as often today, I think. And that's pretty much been dissipated from human culture, except for in cases like the Lehi movement of Israel. Anyway, getting back to this concept, let me, where were we? Real Ark of the Covenant, Tribe of Judah, Shiloh today, Western Bank. Okay, Baal and Asherah inside. Here we go. So, in fact, for most of its existence, the Ark may have been associated with religious practices that would have been completely alien to the Jews of today. Maybe. The biblical verses that claim the Ark contain the tablet. The biblical verse that claims the Ark contained the tablets of the law are also considered to be late texts dated to King Josiah's era, or possibly even later. Romer says, furthermore, he notes that the apologetic verse in 1 Kings 8:9, stating that there was nothing in the ark save the two tables of stone, which Moses put there in Horeb, may have been an indication that the Ten Commandments had substituted something else. Early Israelite worshipping the Canaanite gods like Baal and El, as suggested by 8th century Hebrew inscription found at shrine in Kuntalet Ajard in the northeast Sinai, and by both biblical subtext and the archaeological world. Now we also know that Hathor was the golden calf that the temple of Uya, who we believe to be Joseph, was built upon. So the connections to, and in the Bible it says they worshiped the golden calf when Moses was out of town, and Aaron even helped them do it. So clearly they're interested in Canaanite deities. Not everyone is super Abrahamic. Not everyone's following the rules of Abraham, which is I think 4 or 5 or 6 generations earlier. So early Israelites worshiped Canaanite gods like Baal and El. In the early days, Yahweh himself was far from an invisible universal deity. He was worshipped in the form of a bull. And we'll click on that just so you see I'm not making that up. They literally had pictures of Yahweh as a bull. Where's the bull picture? Bull. Bull? Meh. I'll have to find it later. There are pictures of Yahweh worshipped as a bull. I don't think this is the correct one, though. Interesting. Yeah, but yeah, there's the idea that it was not so much that they weren't supposed to before they were told not to supposed to. Sun carriage pulled by the horse. The sun carriage is important because we can connect Atanism to Judaism in that light. But yeah, I can't find it right this second. I'm sure someone has it somewhere besides that picture. Okay, or a sitting god. He had a divine consort, Ashara. This is God's divine consort, God's wife. So archaeologists discover God's wife. Israel is touted as the birthplace of monotheism, but mounting evidence suggests that the Israelites and later Judites, like their neighbors, worshipped a pantheon. Old Testament is rife with the admonishment of errant kings and queens worshipping false gods, with much of the blame falling on the kingdom of Israel and that of Ahab and his infamous queen Jezebel. So the idea that the king kind of encouraged this and allowed this to happen, or whatever excuse they need. But then you start to find female worship goes back a millennia, female figurine from the Neolithic periods at the Golan Heights area. Interesting. So you'll find more and more stories of the prototypical existence of the Father, Mother, Son Trinity, even in Judaism before Christianity. The site is scattered with dedicated inscriptions to Yahweh and his Asherah. One stands out in particular to Yahweh of Shomron and his Asherah. So the idea that there is a mother that is associated with ancient Israeli traditions is important, and Proto-Hebrew comes up as well. I forget if we already did that yesterday. Let me see if I can show you that really quickly. Paleo-Hebrew, Paleo-Hebrew, which looks more like a Phoenician or almost, Etruscan font. It doesn't look like Hebrew at all. It looks very much more like modern language. Who knows if this is all made up because it was discovered in like 54 or 1940 or the 1870 they found the Shebna inscription. So if you think that this is real, there's a lot of people who think it's real. Most people think it's real. It could be that it's fabricated to justify the existence of this former script, but I imagine the other answer is that Abjad could have been a different, and Paleo-Hebrew could have been a Arabic writing system, and this is, as you dig deeper, you start to find more and more examples of that this was a writing system that existed before the Spaniardification of the writing system, where it ended up becoming more fancy. And now we think of Arabic as very squiggly and cursive, and that's really because of Spain. So let's go a little bit further deeper. Let's see. Divine consort, as shown again in the Ajud inscription, localized cults that venerated Yahweh of Samaria and Yahweh of Teman rather than the centralized worship in Jerusalem. So Yahweh of Samaria and Yahweh of Teman. So the idea that Yahweh might have been a different god in different places. In his book, The Invention of God, Roma writes that throughout the Levant, it was common for pre-Islamic Arabs and Bedouins to carry holy chests that contained two sacred stones or the statues of two gods that were later replaced by the Quran. Similarly, the ark may have originally contained two statues representing Yahweh and Asherah, he speculates. Indirect support for the theory stands abound. Baal was the Canaanite god of storms associated with the war and fertility. Aside from Kiriath Jearim's alternative name of Kiriath Baal, throughout the biblical narrative, the ark is connected to war. For example, it is carried into battle by the Israelites. It is also connected to fertility. Hannah, the prophet Samuel's mother, is a sterile woman who is blessed with a child after praying at the tabernacle in Shiloh and then dedicates her son to the service of God. On the flip side, where King David brings the ark to Jerusalem, when he brings the ark to Jerusalem, he dances ecstatically and semi-naked before the ark. And when his wife, Michal, criticizes the display, she is punished with sterility. These biblical stories may all contain echoes of an ancient cult's connection to the ark. It is difficult to completely untangle the many layers of history and myth contained in these stories of years later, but a broader message does emerge. The Bible appears to describe the ancient Israelites from Moses onward as staunch monotheists who sometimes err towards paganism and are punished for their sins by God. But this picture may be a result of mostly self-serving propaganda by the priests and scribes of the late monarchic or post-exilic periods. The reality emerging today from the combined work of the biblical scholars and archaeologists is much more complex and diverse. It indicates that Judaism, as we know it today, evolved slowly and organically, incorporating a variety of influences and religious traditions from a mosaic of cultures that lived inside and lived side by side in the region. So there you go. There's a little bit right there on this idea. I'm going to go a little deeper on this idea by saying you look at Ammon, Moab, Judah, Philistia, and Shiloh, and you start to find out that following their ascent from Egypt into the Dead Sea, returning back to whence they came centuries earlier, that you'll find that in this area there are a number of cults of gods that are worshipped that are associated with powers, and that taking their idols from them after you conquer them, destroying most of their idols except for their main idol, the most important icon in their temple. And it could often be a small enough icon because it could have been a very ancient or original icon that's been saved. It's not necessarily the biggest one they have. But having these icons, it could also be that it has the organs of, a mummified leader. Who knows? Like they could have associated the hair of a voodoo doll essentially with some person who's part of that tribe. By taking their symbols and placing them into their Ark of the Covenant, they've done two things. One, they've demoralized their enemies, and two, they've defeated their enemies. I mean, their enemies have now erased their culture because they've destroyed everything they have of their culture, except for three, they've kept the final piece. And it's inside their occult belief could be that they're holding on to that power of that god, and that they've trapped him. Now, this comes up over and over again in religions, that the gods have trapped the other gods or the other titans and demons, and that they won't be released for a very long time. The Ark of the Covenant is perhaps filled with more than just these stones of God's law. It might be these statues of Abram. So let's also look at that for a second. Well, hold on. Do I have Abraham? Pull that up real quick. Dun, 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 dun. So, first thing, when we look at Abraham in the Bible, who was originally named Avram, that he changed his name to have a vowel, apparently. It's kind of the story. When he moves on to believing in God. Although theoretically, all of his life, he had thoughts about monotheism. His father was Tar. Tar was a general. Tar had to kill his son. He has his wife smuggle his son out, takes the servant's baby, and has the servant's baby murdered so that his son would live. And I don't know why, but she puts up with it. Later on in a cave, he's asking his parents, well, this is a later picture. Is there a picture of him when he's young? Oh, I know. I've seen this, right? Young Abraham is the thing. They made like a kid's movie about it. This is not a bad movie. It's 40 minutes long. But so you've got this kid. Okay, so the way it starts out is the weird minister guy looks at the stars, knows that a bad thing is coming for the gods. And Abram's father, Tar, knows they're going to try to kill his son because he's living in a really corrupt kingdom. And he doesn't want his son to be killed because he knows his son's going to be a great warrior. And so they move his son out to the uncle's house, and the uncle is a idol maker. So he's secretly raised by the idol maker without too much proximity to his own father, out of safety. Although his father's around to keep him safe. And eventually he decides to smash all the idols in the temple, and that's when they catch him, and they're like, whoa, who is this guy? Oh, wait a second. This guy is not, I mean, his uncle is, oh, he's the guy, he was the baby that was supposed to be murdered, yeah. So Abraham has to escape, and that's the beginning of the tribe of Abram. And so Abraham also is, his father Abraham had many sons, and that leads us down the lineage line to Joseph, and Joseph is then led to Akhenaten or Moses. So there's something else here that's interesting. Let me find it. Here's another thing I thought was interesting. Did Lehi quote Shakespeare? Because if you read the Book of Mormon, it is very King James Bible. It is very Shakespearean English. One of the most impressive things about Joseph Smith, really, is that he could write like a Masonic Deverian figure. I mean, it's impressive writing, some of the things he says. I doubt many people spoke that way. So how many plays did he see? How many books did he read? But he clearly had the gift of gab of Shakespeare down. So shortly before his death, the prophet Lehi admonished his children, "Awake and arise from the dust, and hear the words of a trembling parent, whose limbs ye must soon lay down in the cold and silent grave, from whence no traveler can return. A few days more, and I will go the way of all of the earth." Second Nephi emphasis added. The line has attracted criticism from a number of writers who claim the passage plagiarizes Shakespeare's play Hamlet, but the dread of something after death, the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveler returns, Hamlet 3:1, emphasis added. One of Joseph Smith's earliest critics, Alexander Campbell, sarcastically mused that Shakespeare was read by Nephi 2,200 years before he was born. Well, there we go. Latter-day Saint scholars have responded to this criticism by pointing out that the imagery and language found in 2 Nephi 1, chapter 1, appears, for example, in the Bible. "Are not my days few? Cease then, and let me alone, that I may take comfort a little, before I go whence I shall not return, even to the land of the darkness and the shadows of death." Job 10, 20, 21. Job 7, 9, 10, 16, 22. Emphasis added. Both B.H. Roberts and Hugh Nibley, according to doesn't mean to laugh at Nibley, it's a great name, accordingly argued that the imagery is therefore not original to the Shakespeare, but finds antecedents in the ancient world. So, I mean, you can hear the argument here that Jesus just spoke like Shakespeare or something, but really more important is the connection in the way it's written. So the reason I bring this up is because if this is all connected in some sort of Gnostic way, then it almost gives a little bit of extra credence to Joseph Smith, because, religion's religion. You either believe it or you don't. But if you think that perhaps he had read some Gnostic texts that were banished and incorporated them into the Book of Mormon, then that's very interesting. I mean, it could very well be then that that Joseph's kids are, remember, if Joseph is Yuya, and Yuya is the grandfather of Akhenaten, it's not that hard to imagine Moses interacting with the Americas, because there is, we talk about Cleopatra even interacting with the Americas. Granted, that's far closer to the time of Yeshua, but who knows what's real anymore. So if there is some connections there, it's worth looking into. And certainly there's a lot of stories of that being the case. Okay, now one more thing. You guys are familiar with this map, okay? And this is the crazy, they believe that the world was, flat, and there's turtles, and California's an island, and the Gulf de Mexico's way too big. You can't even golf there. That's how big the Gulf is. Get what I'm saying? The lakes are bigger. There's a freaking mound right here in the middle of But yeah, let's go down a little bit to find it. There's a castle there. There's a bay of people with narwhal whales and stuff. There's this giant mound here. So just so you know, like, this isn't just like empty. There's a lot of stuff going on this map. It's very well documented stuff. But nobody has a map like this, right? Nobody has a map like this. You look at a map of America, it doesn't look like this, right? Unless you look at the, where is it? There it is. The Western Interior Seaway. Okay, so here's the Western Interior Seaway. This is supposed to be millions and millions and millions of years, but perhaps only dog years ago. And it's this idea that America had this island. There's the Appalachia continent. There's the Turtle Island, as we refer to Canada. And there's just so much more water there than ever before. And there's dang plenty proof of all of these animals everywhere. You have them in Egypt. You have them in the middle of Missouri. You have animals that don't exist anymore. Elasmosaurus. I mean, that basically just looks like a giant duck without the wings. You know, I can see his duck body there. But maybe not. Let's see. And I don't know. I'm not going to judge right now whether or not dinosaurs are real. That's not my goal today. But I do want you to know there is a map that very much looks almost identical to this map. Granted, this map is supposed to be of 1500s, and this map is supposed to be of like the late Cretaceous period, so like 1 million, 100 million, I don't know. Like, it's just so long ago you'll never think about it, is the idea. But how long could this have lasted? How long ago could it have changed? How quickly do things change? Let's remember, of course, the disappearing Aral Sea, which we showed before. Let me just jump this up. How long did this take, right? This is disappearing from, well, this is 1989. This is 2014. So very quickly we can see how long does it take for water to disappear? Well, 1989, 2014. Not long at all. Not long at all. This is as long as it's going to take you ever to get some water to drain. So that this was supposed to look like, oh gosh, let me get back there. That it was supposed to look like this hundreds of millions of years ago. Who's to say? Who cares? But how recently did things start to look like this? And you can already see examples of land in these areas that could have connected them together and things being pushed together. Okay, so now I'm going to get into it. Now I'm going to get into Lehi. I hope you guys are ready for a little bit of Egyptian mythology into the Americas. And we're not even really, like, we're going to do a little bit of Eden because, granted, I think there are Mormons out there that are making some videos on these subjects, and I want to watch a few more of them before I jump in too hard. But I'll give you my opinions on the trip and everything. Just give me a second to pull it all together. Also, let me sure I got the right picture here somewhere because I want to have this ready. Boom, boom, boom. Got that one. Got that one. Got that one. Let me just find root. I'm gonna find the root picture really quickly. Ooh, Twitter CEO fires 2 top executives, freezing hiring. And Twitter also fired their commercial guy, the person in charge of design and planning. Okay, I think this will be the picture I'm looking for. Did I find it? I'll work with this one. This will work for me. Okay, cool. Well, really quickly, this is worth showing you. If you were to start out here, and go from Manos or Manisos or from any of the areas of the west side of Egypt, west side of Israel, and that makes sense for a couple of reasons, but not everything makes sense, or not everything that makes sense is done. So just to be clear, but someone did this trip, and they got on a sailboat, and it went through here, stopped in Spain for a second, and then they didn't have to go up that high, but it got them all the way to about 100 miles of Puerto Rico. And then it pulled them in. Then they had to keep going and go back around. Now another trip started on the other side. And you have to think, this is kind of funny. Ugh, go away. Come on. this is kind of funny. There's very little land bridge here. Now, theoretically, there are ways of getting across there, but with a big enough boat, maybe for some reason, and in biblical stories especially, right? Because in a biblical story, even though they could be more convenient to go this way, biblical stories have them do things that don't make sense that actually end up making more sense. And if you were to go this way, it seems like a longer trip, but in about 180 days, 150 days, you'll find yourself naturally, because of wind, pushed back towards Africa, pushed down around Madagascar and the South Cape Cod, and no matter how hard you try, it's not going to pull you back once you get to the Atlantic. It's going to pull you west, and it's going to pull you west right towards Brazil, right past Brazil, and again, towards this spot, towards Puerto Rico. And when you start to learn about the Atlantic Triangle, you start to realize that there is something here that's important. The Bermuda Triangle is a very real thing, but also that there are these islands, right? And we were talking about there are many different paths that one could take. Some people believe this idea of, I think it was an ancient story, no, not an ancient story, but a 1800 story by the priest or the prophet of the church, said that they landed in Chile, and they wrote it into so many of the Deseret chronicles that he landed in Chile. There's no evidence that Joseph Smith said they landed in Chile. So whether or not that's a lie has nothing to do with Joseph Smith, just so you know. But the idea would have been that they went around here, past India, all the way under Australia, apparently. I think, is there a picture there somewhere? Yeah. They had this idea that it went under Australia and by Antarctica and into Chile. That's a fascinating story. There's probably something there about Antarctica, and there's got to be something to that story. It's fascinating. But what seems more likely, and from the research that I've seen into Deseret and Brigham Young, the story is that they got to as close as possible to Eden in Missouri. And it would have been through Puerto Rico into Florida and into the regions of Florida that the clear channel, where the Scientologists are, where the Hollow Earth Observatory is, and where some of the earliest Rosicrucian cults were established, and also where there are Hopewell mounds, right? And I don't know if I've got an example. Do I have an example anywhere of a Hopewell mound? Oh gosh, Hopewell mounds. Let's just do it. Well, first off, I'm going to give you a map of Hopewell mounds just so you see what I'm talking about here. Here's an example. See, down from Florida into Louisiana into Texas, and then going up north, you start to find more Hopewell mounds in these places. Hopewell mounds are different than star forts. They look more squared. They are often, I'll go back again so you can see an example. They're often pyramids, miniature pyramids on top of cave systems, and we have found them in certain places. Now, you wonder why they don't look as impressive as some other mounds. You get the picture that maybe intellectually they felt making these mounds would have been an offense to God. And so some of these mounds are built to look natural and to be part of nature. This is something that's a part of the Druid cult, some of the Mormon cult, some of the different beliefs of Nephite. According to the Book of Mormon, it says not to build step pyramids after a certain point because it offends God because of something someone else did. Who knows? I'm just saying it's in there that they have this idea why this would have been built this way instead of it being more impressive looking. And really, they are kind of impressive. When you start to get into the design, I mean, this is crazy druidic looking patterns of snakes and stuff, and it's very similar to the stuff you find in South America. So there are some connections there. Let me jump back. Okay, and again, with this interior seaway, do I have the picture of Western Interior Seaway, Missouri, if I can find any pictures of that, because there's plenty of ancient sea flooding of Missouri, and what it would have been, basically, Missouri would have been a coastal region, and so getting to Missouri would have been really easy, because you would have just taken boats, and going through the middle of America would have been like going through the middle of Chad, and we know we've talked about the flood, the deluge, this idea. There would have been a period where more of the places were just island pockets, and rather over centuries, the land would start to spread out, and you start to get more marshes and lagoon areas, and there's all kinds of cool wild Smithsonian beasts. Oh, Something interesting, actually. Yesterday, I was doing a show with Aaron Corbett, and I recommend you watch the episode on his channel, Aaron Corbett's channel. Texer, I think is the name. I might have gotten that wrong, but he's in the Discord as well. And one of the things he brought up, and I hope to find more evidence to cite and show you guys, is on the Smithsonian returning the giant's bones to native tribes for proper burial. This is fascinating because theoretically, we've all been told the Smithsonian just hid a bunch of stuff. It might be that the Smithsonian actually returned some of the stuff. Imagine an ethical Smithsonian. I love the idea. So, getting into the Proto-Gulf of Mexico, coming up into the Quachita Mountains, and then finding yourself below the Labrador Sea. But here, the mounds are near Jacksonville, Florida. So, there you have your little idea of a Mormon Eden that's being reached. I can even find more. Mormon Eden, Missouri. Let's just read this really quickly. I thought I had more. I had another page open about this. I'll have to pull it up in a second. Missouri, Garden of Eden. We remember the whole earth was paradisical before the fall. Here's this picture. Open image in new tab. So this is interesting because you start to see this idea of the continents closer together like turtles. And he shall set up an ensign for the nation and shall assemble the outcasts of Israel. By the way, some people wonder, are all the people supposed to be, are all the Native Americans supposed to be Israelites? And the answer is no, because it talks about those sheep from other flocks that are there already and from other places. They go to certain areas that are uninhabited, which is interesting because you find that they didn't go to Chile probably, or they didn't go to Peru, where there are clearly evidences of other cultures. Those cultures were probably first from the Asiatic regions that ascended, and we know that there were Asiatic tribes that were in Israel and Egypt that weren't Israelites. So the idea of there being a place without other people that are interacting with them doesn't really make sense anyway. I'm not saying anything is true or false. I'm just advocating for the logic there. So let me see also if I can pull open is this right? The Mormon thing. Pull this down to double check I got the right window open. Also, display capture properties. Good to see you guys again. It's been a minute. Okay. This it? Does that work? I think that works. Yeah, that works. Okay, so you saw this path. Book of Moroni's America. Moloch, right? And that's something interesting. I don't know how far you want to go into that, but the fact that one of the characters' name is Moloch, and you could call him Mulek, and you can say whatever you want. That's pretty interesting. The West Sea, south into the land of Nephi, head of the river is Sidon, the Ohio River, and so this is the Mosiah's escape. Now, again, you want to say this is Moses or something, maybe, but the Bible, the Book of Mormon doesn't. So I don't know. I feel like they would have said it differently for that reason. They would have just gone with it, and there are opportunities for them to say that. So, Cumorah, Sea of the East. Here's where the final battles are happening up in New York. According to the Book of Mormon, Haggoth goes north. The Molochites have to go south. They land in the north, and they have to go south. That's interesting because it makes sense that some of the tribes who got there at different times. Remember, the Jaredites arrive after the fall of the Tower of Babel, which is 5 centuries or something before the Nephites, the Lamanites, arrived from Egypt, which is just after Joseph. So, I mean, there are moments where just after Joseph, it could have been that Moses started the whole trial, walking across, trying to get to Eden. And there are, I've seen maps of this. See if I can do it again. Utah, Egypt, Moses. I don't know if I can pull it up very quickly. Map. Oh, is this it? No. Well, the thing is, to the credit of those who were trying to make this correlation, and not just today, even the Mormons themselves, you'll find that the path is rather similar in distance and in traverse to parts of Utah, right? I'm trying to look for the Zion, Utah. You can find, there are if you go for, let me just go to Salt Lake City. This will be easier. Salt Lake City map. So Salt Lake City is right here. There is a beautiful Antelope Island that's just above the lake. And there's the West Valley of the city of Jordan. There's a Jericho. There's a Lehi. There's an Ogden. This path is similar in distance. Now, they say that it took them 40 years in the desert and everything to get from Provo into Salt Lake City past, there's a start spot a little further down. But, yeah, you've got this lake right here from Jericho that they cross over the Park City. So this is a similar distance, but it is a very different thing. I mean, this is in the middle of America. These are lakes. Some of these lakes are salt because the salt plains, and this was all area that, as we just showed, was connected by water. You could have taken boats to get to the center of the desert of Utah at some point if humanity was alive at that time. I mean, granted, we have to go into how volcanology changes timeline because our idea of consistent metrics are gone. But Salt Lake City, this chunk of America, you can see really quickly when looking again at where's my missing continent? Is this the one? I don't know. So many things to look through. Okay, well, you get the point. This is not that different in size, and in terms of the map of the American missing water, or that is the perfect region. And going from Houston or Memphis and all these things. Granted, Texas has names like Memphis for a reason, but New Orleans was one of the original spots that people started to port and harbor, and this is why the mafia comes from New Orleans originally, or at least rather when they got to America. They didn't go to New York first. Now you get to Jackson, Mississippi, and you get to Memphis, Mississippi, and you start to see, wait a second, look at this the Mississippi River and its connection to Eden. I mean, and why they went there. Okay, so now I've kind of set that up. Unconventional Book of Mormon theories, internal theory, hemispheric model. The Book of Mormon people cover the entire North and South America. Central American model, South American model, Great Lakes theory, that they went around the Great Lakes. African theory claims this book of child manifestation mysteries revealed beyond a shadow of a doubt that the Book of Mormon is an African book and about Africans. And this isn't even the musical. I can't wait to check this guy's Michael Ash's book out. The Malay theory would have been much easier for Nephi to travel 4,000 miles. I don't know about these. Just wanted to pull them up for you guys. But there is a lot of evidence here of the Hopewell tribe, for instance, all these Hopewell mounds from Iroquois tribes, saying things about traveling on dishes. Let me see if I can find that part. Okay. The United States surrounded blah, 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 blah. Lake Erie. Okay, so the Algonquins say they have ancestors that came across the Atlantic Ocean in what they call turtle boats, and the Book of Mormon says that Jaredites came across the ocean to America in boats that were tied tight like a dish, and that they could be buried under the waves and flip upside down and not have leaks as long as the doors were shut. So there is pretty interesting connections to the Algonquin, or at least cultural references to the Algonquin. There's also the idea of the crocodile and the alligator, and how the Iroquois say when they first arrived from the Atlantic, the first animal they saw is the alligator, so they keep the alligator as a holy symbol of their staff. The Great Lakes area, the Ojibwa tribe, sees the sky migration as a journey from the turtle boats across from the north. So and then again, the Great Lakes were all connected. We have the Alexandria rune stones to show that there were people that were coming here. I'm just saying it's interesting. There's so many of these things that are actually, you wouldn't think it, but they corroborate. So, mound builders, better information, sparse their civilization, loosely estimated to have lived somewhere between 2000 and 300 BC. And the Jaredites are in a part of the biblical narrative that is believed to have been 2200 to 600 BC. So, their times are on top of each other. The idea that this physical anthropological evidence of a tribe was from the time that is essentially when the Book of Mormon says there would be a tribe arriving in Americas from across the boat, across the pond. And that it would be round, turtle-like. I mean, just good stuff. So, final Beria and Camorra area in New York, near Lake Ontario. We start finding out about Ontario. And it always seemed insane to me, like, why would New York be the final battle place? Well, like Lake Ontario, Canada. I can see how Canada would be the final battle place, and that tends to have been true in our history. The Mulekites arrived in America sometime after Jerusalem was destroyed by the Babylonians in 587, according to the Book of Mormon. The Book of Mormon says that the Lord brought them into the land, and north they found Jaredite survivors named Karya Tamur, and he lived with them for 9 months, and he was buried with them. So they know that there are tribes that have interacted with these different groups. Some of the tribes have said that they were tall. Cherokee said they were tall, white Scandinavians that they had to kill off, or giants even that they killed off that were invading their territory. Stories of people being killed off. Granted, a lot of this talks about areas where they find uninhabited. There are places where there are people, but the places that they end up sometimes are uninhabited unless you look at Mulekites, So some of these stories, you look again, the Iroquois and the Ojibwa talk about reaching a place that was uninhabited. They get to a part of the Americas which is one side or another side of a peninsula because water is flowing right through the center of it, and huge amounts of hundreds of miles of swamplands, with alligators and things like that are able to kill you. So they're isolated from each other in certain respects, and it's very different than the Mormon interpretation that you're used to hearing about them just being in Peru and that they were the natives, because genetic evidence, I don't push it for everybody, but it's important that you know that genetic evidence disproves a lot of these theories of Semitic tribes in America, although we can look at how evidence can be faked through Y chromosome, X chromosome differences, and in trying to follow the male line when you might have had females for several generations. It can be quite difficult to get an accurate reading. The point being, the Mormons did just sell Ancestry.com, so that's a thing to consider. Let's go a little deeper. Joseph Smith said, according to the Doctrines and Covenants, Joseph Smith was told to build a city across from Nauvoo on the Iowa side of the Mississippi River and to call it Zarahemla. And another side, he mentioned that the Book of Mormon tells us that the river Sidon ran along the east side of Zarahemla. The word Sidon is related to fish in Phoenician, Greek, and Egyptian, and the Native Americans in the Iroquois region in the Mississippi River have a name, Sisebu, which literally means river of fish. Nefu, which is very close. Sisenefu is very close to Nabu, and they both mean fish. Granted, it's a river, fish. What else are you going to talk about? But the Mississippi River is on the east side of Iowa, and the spot where Lord told Joseph to build a city named Zarahemla, the church actually owned more land over on the Zarahemla side of the river than they did on the Nauvoo side, and some church members lived over there, but they lost it all when the mobs drove them out of Nauvoo into Missouri Mormon Wars, and they went to Utah anyway. So again, the Mulekites could have come down the St. Lawrence Seaway to Lake Ontario, explored that area, and found Quarry Antimer, the last Jaredite, and then to Iowa, where the Hopewell Mound Builders site, dating back to the 500 BCs, and also where the Lord told Joseph to build a city, and call it Sarah, and Zarahemla. And one last Mulak was the son of King Zedekiah of Judah, now known in the Bible as King Zedekiah. And then Jerusalem was destroyed by the Babylonians in 587 BC. The Babylonian king killed the sons of Zedekiah, but the name Mulak means little prince or little king or some Uluk, and must have been the baby, so perhaps his mother's womb when he left. So it's possible that the mother had a offspring of Zedekiah that survived somehow, and that was Mulek. And so you have these stories that are connecting this idea of Babylonianism. So Babylon, post-Babylon, leaving Babylon, ending up in America, and when they leave Babylon, also that there's this infrastructural break, people are unable to communicate, and America's still covered in water, and it's not that long ago. Zedekiah's other sons were killed, perhaps some other escaped Jerusalem with a group of people, but one other way the baby Moloch ended up in the Molechite group that escaped Jerusalem and eventually came over to America. As the Book of Mormon says, the Moloch, the little prince, grew up to be a king of the Molechites because of his birthright, and then a few hundred years later, Zarahemla, being a descendant of the Molechite, was the king of the people of the Nephites, moving further north under King Mosiah first to discover the Molechites, or the people of Zarahemla, as the Nephites called them. Well, okay, let me just pull up again this map. So you got this idea going from here, and again, this is all desert now, but you can see where there was water in places, and this isn't that far. Let me find, do I have a thing on the tribe? Of Joseph. I must have like 3 windows open with this stuff in different places, which is just hilarious. But so the tribe of Joseph in the Bible is of Ephraim and Manasseh, 2 half tribes of Joseph, right? So if you look at the map here, Manasseh is up here, Manasseh, Dan, Macedonia, and Ephraim is just below Manasseh, is right here. So Manasseh had full access to the coast, and Ephraim had access through the Manasseh grounds. Now, they could have walked the other direction, and that was something we were just looking at as this possibility that they walked the other direction and crossed the desert. But let's see here. Literature of the Ancient Mayas, canceled tour in St. Louis. There's ancient Mayan ancient suburb near St. Louis could be lost forever. The Mississippi River from St. Louis, Missouri, famous Gateway Arch, is part of Illinois, that post-industrial wasteland. Some hope construction of a new bridge across the Mississippi River will help revitalize the area, but archaeologists worry further development could destroy what's left of another neighborhood, one that flourished over 1,000 years ago. A figurine found at the East St. Louis dig site is made up of a kind of pipestone called Missouri flint clay. It portrays a kneeling woman holding a marine shell cup, possibly a fertility goddess. Who's to say? So starting to find all of these things around the Hopewell mounds, pretty interesting stuff. This is, there's a lot more history in this area, Cahokia, and again, these are religious temples outside of the major metropolitan urban zones, these are suburbias of the ancient world. Missouri Egyptian revival buildings. You'll start to see plenty of examples in Missouri of these pretty beautiful Egyptian-style buildings, or Egyptian revival buildings, which are very Meso style. And they have their gods and their goddesses, and their, this is Hathor, I believe, right? Unless it's Isis, because she's got the crown. It could be either one. But here's another example. Clearly a Masonic temple. Yep, Masonic. It's labeled and everything. With the wings of Ma'at, meaning order and balance. So their interest in Egyptian mysticism and their connections to the idea that this was the continuation of the culture out of Egypt. Not to say that this was Egypt to them, but they were stepping out of Egypt. That is my understanding of this circumstance. So let me also jump back to where there was more. Oh yeah, this is Lehi's voyage demonstrated the Phoenicia expedition, and they see how long it would take and how easy it was to bounce around. In 2009, they did the whole trip going this way as opposed to south of Australia, and they ended up in parts of America that make the most sense because they're the least populated and the most destroyed already. Unconventional. Hold on a second. Let me go back to my other window. Oh, yeah. No, this is good too. Where's Fox 2 now? Where's the Garden of Eden? Why the LDS owns over 3,000 acres in Missouri. And so this is, put your money where your mouth is kind of a thing. They're convinced that Adam Adon Acham is the entrance to just above. And, again, this is not that south. This is pretty far up from Louisiana at the tip. But you can see where St. Louis and Kansas City, the association between the rivers to escape. So this is more interesting to me than just that everything happened in America, because the idea that they had to leave America, come to Egypt or to Babylon, go back, end up in America. I mean, it just really, it fits my whole, the reset narrative, that things are changing, that people are moving around, that they lose their culture, that they lose their heritage, that they find a new place and they try to accept this new place. I'm pretty convinced that that makes the most sense. So that's one of the reasons why I'm a fan of that theory. There's another thing here, the American Garden of Eden. Is this right? The American Garden of Eden. Passage of time has probably made it impossible to know exactly where the Garden of Eden was located. But they have all of these stones, and they have this plaque, and they think that it could have been this interesting flat area here, which would have been pretty perfect at one point or another. And there's Adam's altar. Joseph Smith taught that Adam will once again come to visit this site. Mormon apostle Bruce R. McConkie makes reference to this event and stated that a portion of Adam's altar had remained there for ages. So, at the Great Gathering, Adam offered sacrifices on an altar built for the purpose. A remnant of that very altar remained on the spot down through the ages. On May 19th, 1838, Joseph Smith and a number of his associates stood on a remainder of a pile of stone at a place called Spring Hill, Daviess County, Missouri. There, the prophet taught them that Adam again would visit the Valley of Adam ad Ondi Acham, holding a great council as a prelude to the great and dreadful day of the Lord. So Latter-day Saints, apocalypse is coming kind of talk, and that they've got this. And one more thing, again, remember the expanding earth, that these turtle islands are moving apart from each other. So at one point it was even easier to move back and forth. That is interesting on so many levels, but one of them being the expanding earth theory is a rather famous idea that was really popular in the 70s. It's had some rejection, mainly because it doesn't fit with the current narrative. But I think even if you don't look at it spherically, you start to think about this idea of continents moving apart and them being alive is pretty good. So, skeletal dinosaur species discovered in Missouri. The idea that they found ancient lost beasts. Well, we just looked at the crazy sea life that was dead. Tribe of Ephraim. Ephraim was one of the tribes of Israel. Tribe of Manasseh, together with Ephraim, the house of Joseph. It was one of the 10 lost tribes. The 10 lost tribes. Okay, so there's 12, and so the 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel that were said to have exiled from the kingdom of Israel. And there's actually one or two more, perhaps a 13th lost tribe. So, according to the Bible, the tribe of Ephraim is descended from a man named Ephraim, who is recorded as the son of Joseph, the son of Jacob, and the son of Asenath, the daughter of Potipharah. So, Potipharah is the priest. We're going to go into him real quick. Potipharah was the priest who's he was a prince and a priest, most believe. I mean, I don't know if most believe, but it's a fact that he was most likely not just a priest, but also a royal, and that was a connected concept. And he was from an Egyptian town of On, which is Heliopolis, that we've been talking about before. So his name means he whom Ra has given. So you get into this really interesting concept of, also this is very interesting. Joseph and Asenath, on this image in Berlin, man depicted close to them is Potipharah. So you start to look at these ancient pictures and you're like, whoa, this is what they think that Egypt looked like and the characters of Egypt. It's very close to that movie, The Gods of Egypt. What's going on up here? Well, what's this lady doing? Yeah, it looks like babies. Just thought you should know. It's probably a biblical story there that matters. Let me jump back to my other window again. This is just crazy. Second. Where is this one? Should say BBC somewhere, right? There we go. Okay. The missing continent that took 375 years to find. This is Lemuria, otherwise known as Zealandia. And this is this continent that is a reason why the Mormons were so interested in the idea that he'd gone this direction, because there would have been a lot of land to find there. This is not the Joseph Smith story. It ends up being more likely that this is an entirely other culture, and this might be connected to the Molochites or whatever, but it's more, this is the people that, the other flocks of sheep that come from Asia that have already been in the Western Hemisphere, their mass exodus out of this land. So there's more stories there. I'd love to talk to a Latter-day Saint who really has an opinion on Sodom and Gomorrah's connection to Gondwana and all these things. I tend to think that this is a more logical place than Missouri for there being an Eden. But hey, there's something there. We already did the Lorca thing, right? This is another article. Hold on. I think this is the right one. Where's my... There. Yeah, okay. Great. Okay, so opening this window up. Scene share. Okay, so now we're going to actually do the thing I said I was going to do, where I tell you a little about Lehi, the Book of Mormon prophet. So Lehi was a... let me just check time, too. Yeah, we're a little into this, so I'm just going to keep going. Lehi was a prophet who lived in Jerusalem during the reign of King Zedekiah, and we're going to just really quickly show you Zedekiah for the sake of it. Here's Zedekiah, and Zedekiah was Zidkayahu, or Matanyahu, which sounds a lot more like a rap star that I'm familiar with. 20th and last king of Judah before the destruction of the kingdom of King Nebuchadnezzar II of Babylon. Zedekiah was installed as king of Judah by Nebuchadnezzar II, king of Babylon, after a siege of Jerusalem in 597 BC to succeed his nephew Jehoiakim, Jeconiah, penultimate king of Judah, who was dethroned by king of Babylon, overthrown as king and after reigning 3 months and 10 days. So this is important to see how Babylon took over and what led to the escape of the Jaredites. Is their Book of Mormon. After the Book of Mormon, a religious text of the Latter-day Saint movement, Zedekiah had a son named Mulek, who escaped death and traveled across the ocean to Americas, where he found a nation, the Mulekites. I just find this really interesting. Mulek, is he a good guy? I mean, it sounds like he's okay. I forget if there was... It sounded like he was chill, and I have to read this again. He dwelt with them for the space of 9 moons before he died. So the last surviving Jaredite, who came from the ancient times, Cormantur, well, chronologically, son of Omer, a deposed Jaredite king. Jaredites, one of the 4 people that came along with, or came to the Americas, including different peoples at different times, the Nephites, Lamanites, and Mulekites. In the Book of Ether, it describes Jaredites as the descendant of Jared and his brother, who lived at that time of the Tower of Babel. So they were far already here. Some to conclude the civilization spanned from the Midwest to the eastern United States, such as New York. Mammoths have now been discovered in abundance, and many Native American accounts describe Niagara as the narrow strip of land that literally translates to the neck. Others argue for this location still north of, near to the neck of the lands in Central America or Mexico. Take your pick. I mean, things were so different then. So, Lehi, in the first book of the Book of Mormon, First Nephi, Lehi and Nephi lead their family out of Jerusalem and across the sea to the Promised Land, the Americas. He's also the namesake for the modern city of Lehi, Utah. And we'll look at that really quickly, because it's not that they're saying he was there, but they're saying it was a pretty place. I believe that's the official story. I don't think that they're saying... Did they say that Nephi got to Utah? I think they think he got to Missouri, but that the Promised Land is in Utah. And yeah, it's just... I love Utah. Utah's a really pretty state, you gotta admit. And, and all of the areas where the Mormons are at, they're fine. This is where they have all this stuff. The Othnielsaurus, which is the biggest bird... That's a big bird, literally. They should paint it yellow. Okay. So, Jaredites we did for a second. We'll have to go back to because it's earlier in history and this is more relevant. Life according to... I'm just making sure also you can see the screen, right? Yeah, okay. Life according to the Book of Mormon. The family of Lehi, its friend Ishmael, and another man named Zoram left Jerusalem sometime before its destruction to the Babylonians in approximately 587. Lehi's group proceeded towards down the Arabian Peninsula until they reached a location called Nahom. I actually showed you guys Nahom yesterday, but let me see if I can pull it up for you. Bountiful place, worldly stop. If I type in the map, is it going to work? No, it won't. Well, okay, I know where Nahom is, so I'm going to pull back for you and just show it to you. It's south of Sinai, and there's an Egyptian connection there. Wow, London is such a star for it. Very good, guys. All right, a little bit deeper, a little bit back. I'm trying to load stuff right now. It seems like I'm using all my internet for other purposes, like getting you guys to see my videos. Okay, so Nahom is down here, just west of Tabuk, near just about, it looks like probably here. Yeah, it looks like Mount Catherine is just about on top of it. So Mount Catherine was an area that surrounded, even maybe just slightly south of Mount Catherine in El Tor. And so El Tor is like El Tar. Come on, that's just too good. And that is the era. Terra, Toro, this is the era of places with, like the fatherland names. So Nahom is here, and they're supposed to have crossed out of Nahom. Now, again, it would have made way more sense for them to leave from the Dan region, the Messina region up here, and just go straight. But yeah, I can see how if you're using the speed of travel, like the speed of travel from wind and everything, there's less wind inland here. The waters are stiller. So you would travel a lot faster along the coast. So I think that actually makes a weird kind of sense, and it is funny that the Bible always says, oh, well, you got to do the thing that normal people do. And again, reaching Missouri through the Western Interior Seaway, which would have existed way closer to our time than just late Cretaceous or Cessation period. Is that what it said? The Campanian period, sorry. Okay. So, Book of Mormon, for some time, Lehi dwelt in a tent. Ishmael is reported to have died by this time, and he was buried at this location. So Ishmael doesn't leave to the Americas with them, an important aspect to this story. And is Ishmael? Because you look at the Book of Mormon version, and like Ishmael is the righteous friend of the prophet Lehi in Jerusalem. But, we just talked about this idea of Moses being a descendant of Joseph, and he's marrying Sephora because it's one of the Ishmaelites' children. Now, they could have just used the name again, and that's probably what it's suggesting here. But I'm just saying it because this goes against my theory. This is closer to Illuminati's theory that that Moses could have been. I don't know if he's saying this, but if Moses was Lehi for some reason, then it would make plenty of sense because you've got Ishmaelites, you've the Ishmaelis, you've got the Nehis and Lehis going to the Americas. Then you've got your whole America could be Egypt thing. Again, that's not my theory, but it's interesting, right? That his friend is Ishmael, and his friend Ishmael doesn't leave, but then they married their children to each other, right? So that's in here too. Lehi takes his family into the wilderness. Lehi brings Ishmael and his family too. The daughter of Ishmael's marry the sons of Lehi, right? So that is the daughters of Ishmael marry the sons of Lehi. So that's literally what it says about Moses and in Zephora. So that's pretty interesting. But the sons of Ishmael join Laman and Lemuel in their rebellion against Nephi. Ishmael dies in the wilderness, is buried at Nahom. After their arrival in the Americas, the children of Ishmael side with the Lamanites, except for those daughters who married Sam, Nephi, and Zoram. So you get in this whole thing of these families working against each other, and that they all have different origins because their wives are different from different tribes as well. Ishmael comes from the Hebrew Yechmael, and Tiberian, God hears. It is the theophoric name translated as God El has hearkened, suggesting that a child so named was regarded as the fulfillment of a divine purpose. So there again, you have this idea that Ishmael really is perhaps Ishmael. I don't know. It is interesting. I'd love to hear what other Mormons have to say about that. By the way, if you're Mormon, this episode is brought to you by Postum. Postum is a non-caffeinated cereal. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, you should try Postum. Have you guys ever heard of Postum? Postum was like the Mormon... Hold on. I got this, and I got some for Cass Castle when I was on that show, because I don't drink coffee or caffeine, as you might not be able to tell. But Postum is a Mormon drink that replaced a coffee substitute. It was actually invented, I think, by like Kellogg or one of the more evil eugenicist cereal brands. But they loved it, and they bought it off of them because nobody liked it but Mormons. So the Mormons were like, "Can we just own Postum?" And they do indeed, and it's not bad. It's wheat bran and molasses or something like that. I like Postum. Postum's pretty good, and they've even got a chocolate brand, and it's pretty good. Now, if you're like 106 years old, you might tell me it doesn't taste as good as it used to taste. I've heard a lot of like 90-year-old people telling me that all the flavors are destroyed, that anything that we used to eat. But that's a whole other subject, really. That's like why corn is bad. Okay, so Postum, Ishmael, Old Testament. Okay, according to Hugh Nibley, and then I got to get more into this Nibley guy. I didn't mean to laugh at Nibley because like Nibley's a cool guy. He was an American scholar and apologist of the Church of Latter-day Saints. Was a professor at Brigham Young University for nearly 50 years. He just has a cute name, okay? But Hugh Nibley is a cool guy, and also you wouldn't laugh at Hugh Nibley. Like, look at his face. That is a serious man. I would hang out with Hugh Nibley up until I died, and I'd probably die young because Hugh Nibley looks kind of dangerous. But I'm just kidding. Hugh Nibley looks like a nice guy. I mean, he's part of the nicest mafia in the world. Part of the Melchizedek priesthood, which we could get into the let's save all of the craziest or more interesting aspects of Joseph Smith for another time. I'm gonna and you can watch my Try LDS video, which is all about Mormonism, but it's really mostly about Joseph Smith. We're gonna have to go far deeper into the order of Aaron, right? The brother of Moses is Aaron, and this is the Aaronic priesthood. And then the order of Melchizedek, which is the Melchizedek priesthood about Melchizedek. So I don't know why they don't have an Enochian priest class. I guess somebody does. According to Nibley, the provincial ancestor of the Arabs is Ishmael. His name is one of the few Old Testament names which is at home in ancient Arabia. Thus, in Lehi's friend Ishmael, we surely have a man of the desert. The interesting thing is that Nephi takes Ishmael, unlike Zoram, completely for granted, never explaining who he is or how he fits into the picture. The act of sending for him seems to be the most natural thing in the world, as does the marriage of his daughters with Lehi's sons, since it has ever been the custom amongst the desert people for a man to marry the daughters of the paternal uncle, Bint Ami. It is hard to avoid the impression that Lehi and Ishmael were related. This is remarkable association between the names of Lehi and Ishmael, which ties them both to the southern desert, which the legendary birthplace and central shrine of Ishmael was at the time called Beer Lahai Roi. So there's some interesting connections there that are actually legit. I mean, there are some legitimate connections, but then you're left with another conundrum, because if these are just two other characters, this is a like Moses character, leading his people out of Egypt. How far out of Egypt? Like as far out of Egypt as you can go. And his friend is Ishmael. I mean, again, we are just right back to this idea of the Ishmaelites. So I don't know. I'm not going to say that Moses isn't until I have better proof. Lehi. I think that makes enough sense. That's kind of scary. I don't know. Maybe you're right, bro. Maybe you're right. Let's find out. So, going back into Lehi, according to the Book of Mormon, his friend Ishmael and other men named Zoram left Jerusalem sometime before its destruction by the Babylonians. Wait, this is the wrong one. No, this is right. Yeah, this is good. Okay, we're good. I can mix up Mormons. It's happened. Moloch, Nephi, I don't mix up Moroni for some reason, but, I can mix up Nephi and Lehi. And I never would mix up Laman. Am I right, fam? Okay. Mormon fam, get that. According to the Book of Mormons, the family of Nephi left From Nahom, the group proceeded in an eastward direction across the desert until they reached a fertile coastal region they found bountiful, where Lehi's son Nephi was instructed by the Lord to build a ship for the purpose of sailing across the ocean to the promised land. The party of men, women, and children also, along with their animals, boarded the ship and sailed until they reached the Americas. The Book of Mormon relates that during his family journey to the Americas and before his death, Lehi gave important teachings to his children and their posterity that were recorded by Nephi on metallic plates that were later used in compiling the Book of Mormon. Okay, interesting. I mean, imagine being on a boat and you're going to write something down. Sure. But metallic plates? Maybe. On a boat? I mean, it's heavy and I guess it's floating. It doesn't matter. But like metallic plates on a boat. I guess. At the time, people were really interested in using stamps, but I guess you wouldn't really want a ceramic. Maybe the metallic plates would last longer because you could just like William Blake. You would just have you ever taken copper and you put something over it and you scrape it and it indents the copper to make a indentation, like a third grade art class? I don't know. These are thoughts. Metal plates later used in compiling the Book of Mormon. Upon Lehi's death, his son Nephi and his son Laman established two conflicting nations, the Nephites and the Lamanites, who were so Lamanite. And as such, he is considered one of the principal ancestors of the Book of Mormon and Native American peoples. According to the Book of Mormon, he is known immediately to his known immediate family is as shown in the diagram below. Lehi married Sariah, who had Laman, Lemuel, Sam, Nephi, Jacob, and Joseph, which also gives you kind of an idea of how big Mormon families are supposed to be. The Book of Mormon states explicitly that Jacob and Joseph are sons of Lehi, but does not definitely state that they were sons of Sariah. However, the book also does mention that does not mention Lehi having any additional wives. Doesn't mean he didn't. It is also believed that Lehi had daughters, maybe even before Jacob and Joseph were born. Lehi's son Nephi mentions having sisters in the writings. Their names and birth order are unknown. So, some of the aspects of the story weren't relevant enough to bring up. That doesn't mean they didn't happen. Doesn't mean they did happen either, but whatever. Lehi, Arizona and Lehi, Utah were named after his Latter-day Saint settlers. So Lehi was an Israelite and father to Nephi. Let's get into Nephi. Nephi is one of the central figures of the Book of Mormon. He's the son of Lehi, a prophet, founder of Nephite people, and an author of the two books of the Book of Mormon, 1st and 2nd. Nephi goes Lehi, had Laman, and then Nephi is, I don't know if this is the correct order, is it? Because then that makes him, a middle son, basically. Even though, again, it probably would have been a much bigger family. There are a bunch of Mormon movies, by the way, not just from 1915. There's even a new Mormon movie. Like, if you go on YouTube, you can watch it in 10-minute chunks. I'm sure you can buy it somewhere. It's not bad. It's not good, but it's very Disney, Brigham Young University, and so it's very high production values. Color grading is amazing. You know what I mean? You'll enjoy it if you want to enjoy it. And if you want to laugh at it, you'll still enjoy it. But it's a very interesting movie if you want to understand some of the aspects. And granted, the more you watch the stuff that seems outrageously absurd, the more likely you are to find some piece of truth that's been hidden in plain sight. That's my MO and opinion. So his family left Jerusalem, traveled to the Red Sea, and then journeyed 3 days, furthering into the wilderness, stopping in a valley by the river near the Red Sea. Some modern scholars have suggested that the location of the camp was near the city of present-day Al-Bad in the Tabuk region of Saudi Arabia, approximately 375 kilometers, 233 miles south of Jerusalem. Lehi then sent his 4 sons, Laman, Lemuel, Sam, and Nephi, back to Jerusalem to get the brass plates. After successfully obtaining the brass plates, they were commanded to return to Jerusalem a second time to bring Ishmael's family for the purpose of providing spouses for Lehi's children. So, I mean, again, just get this into your head, the importance of blood, and that Ishmael would have been, if you were naming somebody Ishmael, it would have been because they were connected to the Ishmaelites, right? I mean, because Ishmael is maybe not, but if it's this big famous thing that Ishmael is not Isaac, right? If it's this big famous thing that Jacob is not Esau, right? Then you wouldn't use that. Why don't people in America name their kid Benedict Arnold? You know what I mean? Like, it's just not a popular name. It might become a popular name now, but for a long time, social connotations. So the idea of them naming him Ishmael, to call me Ishmael means I might be a descendant of Ishmael, as opposed descendant of. Okay, let's just do this again. Ishmael. Nope, the real Ishmael. No offense, Book of Mormon. I just mean the historically accepted Ishmael. Let's pull this up. Ishmael, first son of Abraham, the common patriarch of Abrahamic religions. Okay, so it's just too important to ignore. The firstborn son of Abraham, the common patriarch of Abrahamic religions, and is venerated by Muslims as a prophet. Now remember, Mormons, the Latter-day Saints, are called the Mormons. So the fact that there is a connection here between Joseph and Ishmael producing a new tribe of Latter-day Saints, which reunites the figures of the Semitic Israelites with the Ishmaelites. I'm just going to do a real quick glove clap, because that's an impressive story, whether it's true or false. I mean, it's an impressive story, and it could be true. There's no reason it doesn't have to be. It's not that outrageous that this group that there's tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, that one of the rich from one tribe who's having some problems with his community, and another guy who's good friends with him and has a bunch of daughters and has a bunch of land. And remember, these are shepherds, so they end up working together regardless of money. It's more about property and value. That Ishmael could have married in the Ishmaelite tribe, and the irony being that the matriarchy is necessary for the descendant of Israelis. So what happens then if that's the case? Now, I need to talk to an LDS who really has an opinion on that, because I'm not convinced that that's. I mean, I'm not sure what that means. Whether Ishmael really is Ishmael, or if the Mormon Ishmael is supposed to be a different Ishmael. I mean, clearly they're not saying that Lehi is Moses officially, and I made this point. But I'd love to know if anyone thinks that it's a secret point being made that they were afraid to say, and if so, why would they be? Why would Joseph Smith be afraid to say that? Why not just say it? It seems like something he could say. Okay, so Ishmael, Kaaba and Mecca, the connections, firstborn son, Hagar and Ishmael. Okay, so this is the thing I was trying to explain also, is that it would mean then that Hagar is the mother of the Latter-day Saint Lehites, right? It would mean that the father Abraham's wife Hagar, his slave wife Hagar, would have been the leader of the Latter-day Saints. So this is interesting. This is not what Israelites believe. Israelites are entirely a blood cult that believes that they come from Moses through Abraham. Not even through Moses, sorry, just through Abraham. In fact, Moses is wiped out in his bloodline mostly. He's replaced because he's got strange wives. So essentially Moses helps them out of the Egyptian lands, but he's not allowed to take over the tribe. And that's a big reason why Joshua is so important. Okay, so we did that. His family leave Jerusalem, travel to Red Sea, journey for 3 days in the wilderness. Ishmael's family, for the purpose of making children, plates of brass. A powerful man named Laban was in possession of the plates of brass, a record kept by the Jews which contained their laws, customs, histories, and lineage. Nephi and his brothers tried 3 times to get the brass plates from Laban. First, they sent Laban, who simply asked Laban for the plates. Laban tried to kill Laban, accused him of being a thief. Laban fled back to his brothers, extremely upset. The first time, Nephi convinced his brothers to try to buy the plates using their abandoned wealth. Okay, this is another thing that's important to remember, is that according to the Book of Mormon, is there something something's broken here? Is my internet still working? I'm scared. Is the internet still working? Oh, gosh. We're good? We're good, I hope? It looks like it's still working. Gosh, I had something happen where my screen broke out for a second. So, when they're told that, okay, Lehi sees that the world's messed up, and he sees that his hometown is messed up, and he's walking down the street, and in the Book of Mormon movie, women everywhere are just trying to throw themselves at him for a few bucks, because they're all just like wild hookers. And, that might be cool to some people, but he didn't want that. And he was old and tired. And he's like, I got to get my kids out of this town. So according to the Book of Mormon, he gets up, gets his family, hears the Bible. He sees this vision of the tree of life, which is he's wearing green. He sees the vision of the tree of life. I don't want to go too deep into the Arab, Islamic, Gnostic connections right now, but you guys know that we were talking about green in Islam and Ishmael, and the tunic and the tree of life is a very Gnostic, Sufi, mystical, Arabic, Persian. We can go deeper into that. That's what it is. It's a symbol. So he sees that, and then God tells him, get out of town. Take your family and go. Don't even bring the gold. You don't even need the gold. Which is true if you think about it, because in America there's plenty of gold. I mean, they had so much gold they brought it back to Europe and Asia. So he's not wrong. But he's telling his kids, we got to just drop everything, pick up sticks, leave the gold and jewelry and silver, and just go. So now they're thinking, well, we got to get going. They hear, well, you got to bring these brass plates. You got to bring some plates. You got to have something, a composition notebook to write on. Like, well, what are we going to do? Well, that guy won't give us the brass plates. Well, why don't we give him gold and silver? Gold and silver for brass is a pretty good deal. And that becomes the beginning of that narrative. So Laban possessed brass plates, a record kept by the Jews which contained their laws, lies, and lineage. Nephi and his brothers tried 3 times to get the brass plates from Laban. First they sent Laban, who asked Laban for the plates. Laban tried to kill Laban, accused him of being a thief. Laban fled back to his brothers, extremely upset. The second time, Nephi convinced his brothers to try to buy the plates using their abandoned wealth. Laban wanted the riches, but couldn't give up the plates, sending his servants to kill them. They ran for their lives, and their wealth fell into Laban's possession. The 4 brothers hid in the cave. Laban and Lemuel started to beat their younger brothers severely. An angel appeared and stopped them, telling Laban and Lemuel, because of his righteousness, the Lord had made Nephi a teacher and ruler over them. And this is interestingly like the Joseph's story, the story of Joseph, because Joseph was the youngest son of the prettiest youngest wife, and that made everybody else very jealous of Joseph and the older brothers of Abram. An angel appeared and stopped them, making ruler over them. Finally, Nephi returned to try one last time. Before he got to the house of Laban, he found a drunken man passed out in the street. The man was Laban. Nephi was then commanded by the Lord to kill Laban, an idea he struggled with because he had never before shed the blood of a man. The Spirit told him that it is better for one man to perish than for an entire nation to dwindle and perish in unbelief. Interesting story. For whatever reason. I mean, this story is more believable because it's so weird, to me anyway. It's not believable that God said it necessarily or not. It's just that it's more believable that it could have happened and someone could have told themselves that it was justified because God said so. I mean, regardless of if it's true. It's approachable. Nephi followed through with the command and then dressed himself in Laban's clothing and armor. He returned to Laban's house and ordered Zoram, one of Laban's servants, to bring him the plates of brass. He then led Zoram back to where his brother was hiding. Laman, Lemuel, and Sam, seeing Nephi disguised as Laban, were afraid and turned to flee. Nephi called out to them. When Zoram saw Nephi's brothers, he turned to run, but Nephi stopped them. Nephi promised Zoram that he should be a free man like unto us if he was going to go down into the wilderness with us, to which Zoram agreed. 8 years in the wilderness and flight to the promised land. Nephi spent 8 years in the wilderness, facing many hardships, including the breaking of his own bow, which made it impossible to obtain food, and Nephi's elder brother Laman and Lemuel rebelling against him and his father Lehi. Nephi's rebellious older brother, brothers attempted to kill him at least once kill him on at least 2 occasions. Finally, in the land of the bountiful, Nephi is commanded by God to build a ship and sail to the promised land or to the Americas. However, Laman and Lemuel do not think he should, saying, "Our brother is a fool, for he thinketh that he can build a ship. And he also thinketh that he can cross these great waters." Then he proceeded to try to throw Nephi into the depths of the sea. However, Nephi commanded them not to do so. He does this by saying, "In the name of the Almighty God, I command you I command ye touch me not." There we go. A little bit of that Shakespeare for you. "For I am filled with the power of God, even unto the consuming of my own flesh." What? "Even unto the consuming of my flesh, and whoso shall lay his hands upon me shall wither even as dried reeds." And he as a dried reed, and he shall be as naught before the power of the Lord, for the God shall smite him. Some LDS scholars believe this occurred somewhere along the coast of present-day Oman, Dhofar in Oman. Okay. Life in the Promised Land, Temple, King of Nephi, and death. Not long after arriving in America, Lehi died, leaving the leadership of the colony in his Nephi hands. His brother Laman and Lemuel rebelled shortly thereafter, and the colony split in two. Nephi's followers named themselves Nephites, while the others were dubbed Lamanites. Nephites separated into the wilderness, where they began building in the land of Nephi. Within 21 years of arriving in the Promised Land, Nephi's people construct a temple. Under Nephi's leadership, the Nephite civilization prospered despite occasional war with Lamanites. According to the Book of Mormon, Nephi was revered by his people. Upon his death, the keeping of charge, the sacred records of the Book of Mormon, was passed to his brother Jacob. Nephi's vision of the young Jesus and Mary. And so you got this. This is all in the line with that idea of the Book of Mormon talking about Egypt in America, but also that Egypt is Egypt, that America is America, that they're both important, that America is Eden, that people went from Eden all the way back to Egypt, and then went from Egypt all the way back around to America, and that people were traveling by boats long before any time that we were told that they were traveling by boats. Now, that might seem a little much for some people to believe, but it's basically the religious belief of most cultures, and it's scientifically what we're supposed to catch up with believing now that we're defeating Eurocentricity, the idea that Europeans were the first to have a civilization. Simply not true. We now know there were boats many years before that, many generations before that. I thought I'd bring it up. Okay, any super chats or anything? I'm going to go through those really quickly before I finish up. No super chats today. Okay, guys. Well, I'm going to cut out. It was fancy seeing you here.
This is the story of a 30-year search by U.S. intelligence agencies to perfect mind control. Some of those engaged in that search have agreed to talk about it for the first time. One said, "I think every last one of us felt sorry to attempt this kind of thing. We knew we were crossing the line." The search would be endless. From brothels, an agent says, "We learned a lot about human nature in the bedroom," to the mystical rites of the magical mushroom ceremony performed by an Indian shaman, to a Spanish bullring. Bull has had electrodes implanted in the brain and is controlled by a scientist. There would be victims. One intelligence agency tried to peel this man's mind back to reveal its deepest secrets. This man worked on some of these programs. He would write of his work, "It was fun, fun, fun." This is the story of the search for mind control. ABC News Close-Up, Mission Mind Control. With ABC News correspondent Paul Altmaier.
Mark?
Man.
It's been ages.
Can I buy it?
Allow me. Do Michelob Lights?
Michelob makes a light beer.
Universities throughout the country, and word would begin to spread on campus about this so-called mind-blowing drug. And suddenly, there was the counterculture of the 60s.
I give the CIA a total credit for sponsoring and initiating the entire consciousness movement, counterculture events of the 1960s.
Dr. Timothy Leary, the 1960s Johnny Appleseed of LSD.
The CIA funded, supported, and encouraged hundreds of young psychiatrists to experiment with this drug. The fallout from that was that the young psychologists began taking it themselves, discovering that it was an intelligence-enhancing, consciousness-raising experience.
I know that some of the studies in which the CIA had supported used as subjects people who later became strong proselytizers of LSD. So, in that sense, yes, I think that did sustain the perpetuation of the use of the drug. And it's rather ironic, isn't it?
The counter case that I would make in relationship to that is to remember that the people who were doing the research were people who would be doing the research regardless of who was the sponsor. I don't think anybody working in that time in the remotest ever thought that it would blow up into the kind of thing that it did.
History will judge the role of the CIA and other intelligence agencies in unwittingly contributing to the counterculture of the 60s through their intense interest in LSD and other hallucinogenics. But for the moment at least, the argument can be made that the CIA helped usher in the age of Aquarius. ABC News Close-Up will continue in a moment.
Being careful about my body doesn't just mean major things like regular breast exams. I'm even careful about pain relievers. Plain aspirin sometimes upset my stomach, so I use Bufferin. It adds protection. I'm careful about what goes into my body. Bufferin gives me an added relief action I want. Tylenol doesn't.
Only one leading tablet has both. An added relief action in many cases that Tylenol never provides, and protection ingredients. Bufferin.
Now I'm careful to get both with Bufferin.
Your sink trap's clogged with grease. Use Crystal Drano.
I'll pour in liquid plumber.
Don't. It may not work on that grease clog.
No?
Crystal Drano will. Look, liquid plumber's quiet. It's not melting that grease.
But Drano is. It broke through. Will Drano hurt metal pipes?
No.
So liquid plumber didn't break that grease clog. I'm switching to Drano.
To make clogs go, better use Drano.